I'm 82. The person I protected my whole life was the one who hurt me most. A spoken story by Hermione, age 82. My name is Hermione. I am 82 years old, and I have been sitting in this chair for 3 days now, trying to find the courage to say what I am about to say. I have told stories before. I have talked about regret, about love, about the years that slipped through my fingers like sand on a summer morning. But this story, this one has lived locked inside my chest for a very long time, like a bird that is too afraid to fly and too alive to stay still. So today I am going to open the cage, and I want you to listen, not because my story is special, but because I believe deep in these old bones of mine that somewhere out there you know exactly what I am about to say. Maybe you are living it right now. Maybe you lived it years ago and never told a single soul. This story is for you. Part 1. The beginning of everything. I was born in a small town, the kind of town where everybody knew your name, your mother's name, and probably the argument your parents had last Tuesday. We had very little money, but we had each other. That was what my mother always said. We have each other, Hermione. That is enough. I had one sibling, a younger sister. Her name was Clara. Clara came into this world 3 years after me on a cold January morning, and from the very first moment I saw her, I felt something I cannot fully explain. She was so small, so fragile, so completely dependent on the world around her to keep her safe. And even at 3 years old, even as a tiny child who barely understood what love meant, I made a decision. I would protect her. I did not know that decision would define the next 79 years of my life. Clara was different from me in every way. I was quiet, she was loud. I liked books, she liked people. I thought before I spoke. Clara spoke before she thought, laughed before she understood the joke, and apologized after the damage was already done. But she was beautiful. She had this way of walking into a room and making everyone feel like they had been waiting for her. People loved Clara. People were drawn to her like moths to a flame, and I spent my entire childhood making sure that flame never burned out. When the older boys at school made fun of her, I stepped in. When she failed her exams, I stayed up all night helping her study. When she broke Mother's favorite vase and was terrified to confess, I took the blame. I stood there and looked my mother in the eyes and said I broke it, and I accepted the punishment without flinching. Clara stood behind me and said nothing. I told myself that was fine. She was younger. She was scared. That was what big sisters were for. Part 2. Growing up. As we grew older, the dynamic between us did not change. It simply got bigger. The problems got bigger. The stakes got higher. And my role in Clara's life became more and more like a foundation she stood on without ever once looking down to see what was holding her up. I was the one who worked 2 jobs so Clara could finish her education when our father became ill and money became scarce. I was the one who negotiated with the landlord when she could not pay her rent. I was the one who sat with her at 3 in the morning when her first marriage fell apart and she cried until she had no tears left. I remember that night so clearly. She looked at me with those red, swollen eyes and she said, "Hermione, what would I ever do without you?" And I smiled. I held her hand and I said, "You will never have to find out." I meant it. With everything I had, I meant it. I was working at that time in a small accounting firm. I had a talent for numbers. I had always been disciplined, careful, methodical. I saved carefully. I planned carefully. I lived a quiet, steady life, and slowly, over many years, I built something. Not a fortune, but something solid. A small amount of savings that represented decades of careful living and sacrifice. I never married. I had one serious relationship, a man named Edward, who was kind and patient and who loved me genuinely. But Clara was going through a crisis that year, and I gave so much of my time and energy to helping her that Edward eventually said he felt invisible. He said he could not compete with my sister. He was not wrong. I chose Clara. I told myself it was temporary, that once Clara was settled, once she was stable, I would build my own life. I would call Edward. I would start fresh. Clara got settled. I never called Edward. Time has a way of moving faster than your intentions. Part 3. The money. I need to tell you about the money now, because this is where everything becomes something I cannot explain away with love or loyalty or the bond between sisters. When I was 61 years old, Clara came to me with a business opportunity. Her son, my nephew Daniel, wanted to open a small restaurant. He had the passion, he had the plan, he had the location. What he did not have was the starting capital. Clara sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same way she had sat across from me 1,000 times before, and she said, "Hermione, you are the only person in this world I trust completely. I would never ask this if I were not certain." She wanted me to invest my savings, a significant portion of what I had spent 40 years building. She promised me it was safe. She promised me Daniel had a solid plan. She promised me I would be paid back within 3 years with interest. I asked questions. I tried to be careful. But this was Clara. This was my sister. The person I had protected since the day she entered this world. I gave her the money. The restaurant opened. For a while, things seemed fine. Daniel sent me occasional updates. Clara would call and tell me how well everything was going. Then the calls became less frequent. Then the updates stopped. Then one afternoon I called Clara and she did not answer. I called Daniel and he did not answer. I drove to the restaurant and found it closed. A sign on the door, a notice from the landlord. The restaurant had been closed for 2 months. Nobody had told me. I stood on that pavement at 63 years old, looking at that locked door, and something shifted inside me, something quiet and terrible. I drove to Clara's house. She answered the door. She looked at me, and for just one moment, one brief, fleeting moment, I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen there before. Guilt. Raw, unmistakable guilt, and then it was gone, replaced by tears, by explanations, by a storm of words about how Daniel had tried his best, how the economy was difficult, how she herself had lost money, how she was devastated, how she was so sorry, how she never meant for any of this to happen. I stood there and I listened, and I held her while she cried, because that is what I did, that is what I had always done, but something inside me had changed. Part 4. The truth. It took 2 more years for the full truth to come out. A mutual friend, a woman named Patricia, who had known both of us for decades, came to me one afternoon with a kind of reluctant, pained expression on her face. She said she had debated telling me for a long time. She said she hoped I would not hate her for it. And then she told me. The restaurant had not simply failed. It had been poorly managed from the beginning, and both Clara and Daniel had known it was failing months before it closed. They had known it was unlikely to succeed even before they came to me. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that the money I had given them had not all gone to the restaurant. A significant portion had been used to pay off Clara's personal debts, old debts she had accumulated over years and had been hiding from everyone, including me. The restaurant had simply been the mechanism, the story, the reason she could come to me and ask for money without revealing the truth. She had used my love. She had used my trust. She had used 79 years of my protection and devotion as a tool to solve a problem she was too ashamed to tell me about, honestly. I sat in Patricia's kitchen, and I did not cry. I did not speak for a very long time. I just sat there, and I felt something moving through me that I still do not have a perfect word for. It was grief, but it was a different kind of grief than losing someone to death. It was the grief of realizing that the person you thought existed, the person you had organized your entire life around protecting, had perhaps never existed quite the way you believed. Part 5. The silence. I did not confront Clara immediately. I spent several weeks in a kind of fog, going through the motions of my days, waking up, making tea, sitting by the window, thinking. I thought about every moment I had chosen Clara over something or someone else. I thought about Edward. I thought about the jobs I had taken and the ones I had turned down because Clara needed me. I thought about every morning I had woken up and thought about her before I thought about myself. And I asked myself the hardest question I had ever asked. Had I done all of this out of love, or had I done it out of habit? Out of an identity I had built so early and so deeply that I did not know who I was without it. I still do not have a clean answer to that question. Eventually, I went to see Clara. She opened the door and she looked at me the way people look at someone they have been expecting and dreading in equal measure. I did not shout. I am not a person who shouts. I sat down. I told her what I knew. I told her calmly and completely. She cried. She apologized. She said she had been too ashamed, too afraid, that she had convinced herself the restaurant would succeed and she would pay me back and I would never need to know. She said she loved me. I believed her. That is the complicated part that people do not always understand. I believe Clara loved me. I believe she was also capable of doing what she did. Both things are true at the same time. Love does not make people incapable of betrayal. Sometimes the people who love us are precisely the ones with the most access to hurt us. I told Clara that I needed time. I went home. I closed the door. Part 6. What I learned at 82. I'm not going to tell you that I have completely healed. I am 82 years old. At this age, you understand that some wounds do not close. They simply become part of the landscape of who you are. But I have learned some things, and if you are still listening, I want to share them with you. I learned that protecting someone is not the same as loving them. Real love includes honesty. Real love sometimes means saying the difficult thing instead of absorbing the consequence of someone else's silence. I learned that when you spend your whole life being someone's shelter, you can accidentally teach them that you are indestructible, that you will absorb anything, that there is no limit to what you will forgive and carry. And some people, not evil people, not monsters, but ordinary, flawed, frightened people, will eventually take more than they should because you have never shown them where the line is. I learned that I played a role in my own story that I had to be honest about. I had made myself indispensable to Clara because it gave me purpose, it gave me identity. The day I stopped and asked who I was without that role was one of the most frightening days of my life. I learned that forgiveness is not a door you walk through once. It is more like a practice. Some mornings I wake up and I have forgiven Clara completely. Some mornings the old grief comes back and sits on my chest like a stone. Both of those mornings are part of living honestly. And I learned, perhaps most importantly, that it is never too late to ask yourself who you are when nobody needs you, what you love when you are not loving in service of someone else, what your life looks like when it belongs entirely to you. I am 82. I ask myself those questions now, every single day. What I want you to know. If you are out there protecting someone, I want you to hear me. Protection is a gift. It is one of the most beautiful things one human being can offer another. But you must protect yourself too. You must remain somewhere inside all that giving, a person with a center, with the ability to say this is too much before too much has already been taken. And if someone has hurt you the way Clara hurt me, if the person you gave everything to turned out to be capable of taking more than you realized, I want you to know something. That does not cancel the love. It does not mean the love was not real. It means they were human. It means you were human. It means life is complicated and messy and full of people who contain both tremendous love and tremendous weakness at the same time. You are allowed to grieve it. You are allowed to be angry. You are allowed to create distance. And you are allowed on your own timeline, in your own way, to eventually set it down. Not for them, for yourself. Because you have carried enough. My name is Hermione. I am 82 years old, and I am only just now learning how to put the weight down.